In these weeks of Nehama, these weeks of consolation between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, we read from the consolations of Yeshayahu various haftarahs from the chapters 40 through 66 of Sefer Yeshayahu. What the Rambam calls in his list of the haftarahs at the end of Sefer Ahava, Nachamos Yeshayahu, the consolations of Isaiah. And in other videos, we've looked at other practices of these weeks, other liturgical practices, the recitation of piyutim, connected to the themes of the haftarahs and based on them. But this time, we're going to look at a somewhat different practice during these weeks of laning the book of Daniel in the afternoon of the Sabbaths of these weeks. Let's go ahead. Let's look at this first source from Rav Yaakov Mem Fartush, Seder HaTefilot Lefi Minhag Yehudei Gardaya, from Algeria. So this is an article where he's detailing all sorts of different practices, liturgical practices throughout the year of this location in Algeria, where in fact he was from. I'm not going to try to attempt an Algerian accent to read this text. I will just use a general Sephardic accent, whatever that means. Mincha shel Shabbat. Harav Rashi doresh derasha b'meshach sha'a achat, v'achar kach kor'im pesukei go aleinu Hashem tzvaot shemo, kakatuv b'sefer arba'ach vi'im ad va'avadai yishkenu shamma. So, on Shabbat afternoon, the rabbi gives a lecture for about an hour, and at the end there are certain psukim that they recite, which are published in the book Arba'ah Gvi'im. Arba'ah Gvi'im is a book that was published late 19th or early 20th century. Certainly there were a number of printings in the early 20th century, with various liturgical things that you need if you live in North Africa and pray in one of the North African communities, which cannot be found in the Livorno Machzor, the Livorno Sidur, the generally available Sephardi Sidurim of the time. And so these psukim are found there. And after this, what do? They read from the book of Proverbs on the 6 Sabbaths between Pesach and Shavuos. Not the whole book, but rather over the course of the weeks, the whole book is read. It's divided into 6 portions. Sefer Iyov nikra b'shesh Shabbatot echel b'Shabbat shniya she'achar Chag HaShavuot ad Shabbat Divrei Yirmiyahu lefi ha'chalukah dilahala. Megillat Eicha nikret b'shtei Shabbatot shelifnei Tisha B'Av lefi ha'chalukah dilahala. So there's 6 weeks between the end of the week of Pesach and Shavuot. In those 6 weeks, you read 6 portions of Mishlei, finishing the book. Then you have a week off after Shavuos. And then in the 6 weeks after that, starting the second Shabbos after Shavuos, they divide Iyov into 6 portions, and you end in the first Shabbat Divrei Yirmiyahu. You end in the first Shabbos of the 3 weeks. The remaining 2 Sabbaths of the 3 weeks, they divide Eicha into 2 parts. Then again, after Tisha B'Av, Shabbos Nachamu is a week off. Then, Sefer Daniel nikra b'shesh Shabbatot, hatchel b'Shabbat shniya she'achar Tisha B'Av, ad ha'Shabbat shelifnei Rosh Hashanah, lefi ha'chalukah dilahalan. So Daniel is read over the 6 Sabbaths, beginning the 2nd Sabbath after Tisha B'Av, which is Parshas Ekev, until the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, following the following division, which is the division as printed in Sefer Arba'ah Gvi'im. Arba'ah Gvi'im prints the entire text of Mishlei, Iyov, and Daniel, and it divides each into 6 portions. Now, these portions are a little weird. They don't divide at parsha breaks. They don't divide at topic breaks. The first week, they read, it's Shabbat Shana Daniel. That's not actually the first word of the book, but they mean the beginning of Daniel, from verse 1 until verse 3-4, which is the fourth verse in the story about Nebuchadnezzar's idol. The second Shabbat, they begin, they begin in the middle of that story. And they continue into the next story, which is indeed connected, but it's a new story and it's a new parasha. Well, there's several parashot in between, but it is certainly a new topic. All this befell King Nebuchadnezzar in the middle of that next story about Nebuchadnezzar's madness. Shabbat Revi'it v'Daryavesh Mada'a. Okay, that is indeed the beginning of a story. The story of Daniel in the Gubba Da'aryavatha, in the lion's den, Gova Arayot. Arguably, the story actually begins in the next verse, but it's a decent break. And then they read from that story into the next chapter, which is in Aramaic, this is all still in Aramaic, fine. So they go, but the next one is a vision. It's the beginning of a story, the end, the story, and the beginning of the vision till Itkiryat Ruhi, which is the middle of that vision in chapter 7. Then the fifth Shabbat, they begin Itkiryat Ruhi, chapter 7, all of 8, which is a Hebrew vision, and the beginning of chapter 9 till the middle of Daniel's prayer. And Shabbat Shishit, they begin Hashem Shema'ah, which is the end of Daniel's prayer, through the end of the book. I do understand why they would want to begin the last Shabbos with Hashem Shema'ah, because it is a powerful, prayerful verse. God, hear Hashem Shema'ah, Hashem Salacha, Hashem Akshiva. God, hear, God, forgive, God, listen, especially since that is the Shabbos right before Rosh Hashanah. You're deep into Slichas time, especially in Sephardic communities, which have been starting since Elul. So I understand why they'd start that. Then a lot of the other divisions, I do not understand. What's going on here? Why are they laning Daniel in the afternoon? So there's a passage in the Bavli, in the Gemara, Amarav, lo shana lo bisman beis hamedrash, lo bisman beis hamedrash, korin. The Mishnah talks about books that you read on Shabbos and books that you don't read on Shabbos. It's talking about books of Tanakh, and you save them from a fire. Torah and Nevi'im, of course, you save them from the fire, and you need them to read from the Torah, read the Haftarahs. But even the Ksuvim books she'en korin bahen, you still save them from fire. Why don't you read from them? What's going on here? And is this a blanket prohibition on all of Shabbos? So in the Gemara, Rav says the whole Mishnah that's talking about not reading from them only means at the Bisman Beis HaMedrash, at the time when there's the Pirka, the time when there's the official lecture. The rabbi would give a lecture, and everyone would be expected to come. Today, in most communities, and as much as this exists at all, it's really only on Shabbos Shuvah and Shabbos HaGadol. But in the past, this was a big deal. Even in the 19th century, early 20th century, the Ben Ish Chai would, what is the Ben Ish Chai? It's the report of his lectures, which he would give for hours on Shabbos afternoon. That was the Talmud Torah of the people. And so if the reason was, you shouldn't read other books, even books of Ksuvim, while the lecture is going on. Torah and Nevi'im, we can't prevent you from reading. The idea being the Torah Sheba'al Peh that's given over at the lecture is more important than reading Ksuvim. It's not more important than Torah and Nevi'im, but it's more important than Ksuvim. Okay. Shmuel says, Afilu, Shelo Bisman Beis HaMedrash Koren. Shmuel says, no, all Shabbos, there's a blanket prohibition on reading Ksuvim. Why would that be? Well, the end you see, Kadesh Yomru B'chis Ve'akodesh Ein Koren V'chol Shekein B'shtor Hadyotos. So people should say, if you can't read even in Ksuvim, certainly you can't read secular documents. This may mean your checkbook, but it's been suggested, there's a footnote in an article by Natan Fried, from which I got a lot of the information about this topic, about reading Ksuvim on Shabbos afternoon and different minhagim of this, that it may actually mean books, non-canonical books, apocryphal books, And that the idea was that Shabbos is a holy day. We don't read non-canonical literature, and even the Ketuvim are part of that non-canonical literature. Perhaps it's a very early Gezerah when Torah and Nevi'im were the only canonized books. There was not yet any canonization of Ketuvim, perhaps. And if so, that should apply even Shalom Bizman Beis HaMedrash. It's not just so that you attend the rabbi's lecture, but it's so that the whole Shabbos there would be this prohibition. Okay, how can it be? Shmuel said the whole day you can't read Ketuvim. But Nahardea was where Shmuel was the rabbi. And in Nahardea, they would paski sidra, they would read Sdarim, they would read passages of Ksuvim, they would link Ksuvim at Mincha of Shabbos. So the Gemara suggests that maybe we should flip it, that it's Rav who said that the prohibition is only Bizman Beis HaMedrash, and Shmuel said it applies all day. And then Rav Oshay, or as typically pronounced today, Rav Ashi, says, and he suggests that not that they would actually read them. Okay, so Rav Ashi suggests that maybe in Nahardea, it's not that they read them systematically, that they read parshas from them, certainly in order, but rather they would give lectures, shonin b'hem v'doshim b'hem, and they would expound upon them. And if they would need a pasuk, they would grab a scroll of it and look at just that one pasuk. But ashtus of paske sidra, that they would end portions, meaning they would read portions till the end, is that they would actually lay in the Ksuvim. And in fact, another passage in Shabbos in chapter Bameh Madlikin, when it's trying to figure out what on earth does the Gemara mean when it talks about Haftara in Mincha of Shabbos. There's no Haftara in Mincha of Shabbos. And the Balei Tosfos suggests that no, the Haftara, where it says Maftir ben Navi, it doesn't mean Nevi'im, it means Ksuvim, and it quotes this passage, meaning that no, they would read it the way you read Torah, the way you read Haftarah. They would actually lane parshas from it. And certainly that's a practice that we're seeing in modern times. In this article in 1969 of Yaakov Mem Fartush reporting his own experience. And this is not just in Algeria, you see in Morocco, in Tunisia, that this was certainly throughout North Africa in living memory. And there may even be some shuls of North African background, there may actually in Morocco or in Tunisia, there may actually be some shuls there today that practice them. I don't know, but maybe in France or in Israel, there are some traditional shuls that keep up this practice. But in the past, it was more, you think, oh, I'm not North African. What does this have to do with me? This is a much more widespread practice. In the past, it seems, as Tovia Preschel has Zichron Livracha pointed out in an article years ago, and he cites Shmuel de Valerio's commentary Hazol HaMoed on Sefer Daniel. Venice, Reish Mem Vav, that's 1586 in the introduction. Shmuel de Valerio lived in southeastern Europe, in Ottoman southeastern Europe. Area we would now call, I think it's Moria, which I think is in Greece, might be Bulgaria. So the point is, it's southeastern Europe. It's far from North Africa. He wrote a Pshat commentary. He's very interested in philosophy, and he was a physician. And in that era, there were Jewish physicians who went to university in Italy. He may have. Well, he lived in Ottoman lands. It's not far to Italy. We know that Sforno, Rabbi Ovadia di Sforno, had a medical degree from university. And once he went to university, studied philosophy. He's certainly very interested in philosophy. It's rare to have a Pshat commentary on Tanakh during this period. From the second half of the 16th century 17th century, first half of the 18th century. There's little pshat commentary on Tanakh written by Jews. Here is such a book. Very interesting book. It was never reprinted, but I got this copy printed out from Hebrew Books. So in his introduction, he has a number of questions. First of all, was Daniel a prophet? Or did he simply have Ruach HaKodesh? And what's the distinction between that? And why is Daniel in Ketuvim? Why not in Nevi'im if he's a prophet? But if he's not a prophet, what does this mean? This is a matter of philosophical theology for a different topic, for a different time. Second, this is a source critical question. Who's the author of this book and which parts of the book? Are there parts that are by Daniel? Are there parts by the editor? What's going on here? Also, not a topic for today. That's a topic for a different time. Third question, V'hagimel, V'hashalishi. ראוי לדעת, דור הולך ודור בא. מה ראו על ככה ומה הגיע עליהם מדי שנה ושנה, והגיע תור הספר הזה, לקרות אותו מתשעה באב עד חג הסוכות, אשר גם בזה לא בחר שום אחד מהמפרשים לשום עינו עליו. Why is it that דור הרעים, דור הרוס, generation in, generation out, why do they do this? Why is it that each year when the time comes to read this book, from Tisha B'Av through Sukkot, slightly longer period than we saw in Chadaya, which was through Rosh Hashanah, but the same general period. Why is it that we late at this time? And none of the commentators dealt with this question. He deals with the various questions, questions 1 and 2, and then he gets to question 3. All that's left is to discuss this question: why Tamid midei shana v'shana tzipor hasefer hazeh mitisha b'av ad chag mitish'a b'av ad chag haSukkot. V'hasiba hi mevoeret me'atzma. The reason is self-evident. Ki lichot ha'inui va'esped hahu asher anu osim midei shana v'shana hu al nefilat ateret roshenu u'miktashenu echarev. ועל גלותנו שהגלו את אבותינו בבבל. לכן נהגו העם לקרוא את הספר הזה מאותו יום והלאה. הודיע יריה אף יצריח אופן גלותנו איך היה. ועל ידי מי ועוצם יכולתו יתברך שאף בהיותם בארץ אויביהם לא מעשם. והרכיב אנשי גאולתנו על במותיה ההצלחות כדניאל וחבריו. So, each year we have mourning. Tisha B'Av, time leading to Tisha B'Av. What's the reason for it? Because our temple fell and we were exiled into Babylonia. Therefore, we read this book, which begins teaching us who was it who exiled us? The Babylonians. The book begins. The 3rd year of King Yehoiakim Melech Yehuda. It's a famously very problematic, difficult verse in terms of the chronology, but never mind. Nebuchadnezzar Melech Babel Yerushalayim Vayatzar Aleh begins with the Chorban. It begins with Nebuchadnezzar coming and besieging Jerusalem, exiling Daniel and his friends. But nonetheless, during that time of exile, even in their time when they were in their enemy lands, Lo Ma'asam, he did not reject. God did not reject them. God made the people of our redemption, our Jewish heroes, ride over the heights of success, ride on the heights of success like Daniel and his colleagues and his friends. And then the continuation of the book, לא איש אל ויחזב ובן אדם ידחם עלו, הוא אמר ולא יעשה פקידה לסוף 70 שנה, דיבר ולא יקימנה הפקידה השנייה, הנרמזת במראה הרביעית לדניאל איש חמוד עוד, כמו שקיים הראשונה, גם את השנייה, בעזרת השם יקימנו. That the second half of the book is all these promises and visions of future Geula. And just as God fulfilled the 70-year promise that at the end of the 70 years, there would be, the temple would be rebuilt, so there are future promises, and God will fulfill those promises at the end of the current Galut. The idea being, the book begins with exile, with destruction. It ends with promise of coming of the Geula, the redemption. And in the middle, V'Daniel dana hatzlach v'malchut daryavesh v'malchut koresh parsa, that Daniel was successful in even during the time of exile. This is Nechama. The Nechama is, even though the destruction of the exile happened, even while you're in exile, you'll be successful. And don't worry, there's the promise that at the end of days, the exile will end. Another source here, Rav Moshe Alshich, Perush and Sefer Daniel, it begins. Miyamim abagiat or lidrosh v'lator b'sefer imre shefer alaz vo il Moshe be'er v'ishpesh v'lo matzah ya'arich yarchiv b'mishrei kitrin v'yiturin v'hasorim v'hasra. Moshe Alshich was a darshan, and he would give drashas about parshas. And here also, when the time of this book came, when the time of this book of beautiful words came, Ho'il Moshe is talking about himself. I, Moses, would begin to explain and expound upon the book, and I searched. I didn't find sufficient commentaries to solve all the knots in it. Uses beautiful language taken from the book itself, L'mishrei kitrin, to untie the knots, to solve the difficulties in it. So he says, I'm going to write my own commentary of the book based on my lectures. On the weeks, on the Shabbosos, when they read the book, I decided that I would prepare my lectures about the book. So not only would they lay in the book, but Alshich would give shiurim on it. And then after that, I would write out with pen and ink my chidushim. What had come up, my new ideas that I had written in the shiur. And eventually I realized, look, I have a book, I can write it. Okay. Now you'll see here, what I have here is a scroll, kosher scroll of the book of Daniel. How much you can see in the video. See the opening. Bishnat shalosh l'malchut Yehoyakim melech Yehuda. At least on my screen, it's coming up backwards because of the way that videos work. Perhaps with a mirror, I could show you better, but I'm not sure there's real need to do that. Point is, I've got this scroll. What's with writing books of Ksuvim on scrolls? So briefly, since it's not really the topic of the lecture, we see here from Rav Shlomo Boyarsky and Amudei Sheshar Keita. He's in the Litvak in the 19th century who makes it to Yerushalayim. He writes, "Vashemo be'ezrai ligmar ksivosam b'shira asher nela me'ink ol tameim sefer tilim kusat yisnayim ve'echod salachti lachi zal libris sort of the Knesset Gdela flavor about tilim b'tzibur." He's talking about how he wrote books of Ksuvim on Klaf, and now this is very important. Uvieser, after the three dots here, after the ellipsis, the Isa P'teisvis, Tibur Maschal Bodek Nesias Shel Bavel, Mahane Tnai, Sarei Bevias Gael Tzitena, Tipokat Kedusasan, that the synagogues in Bavel are not made for their holiness, is not meant to last forever, because when the redemption comes, then the Jews will be brought to Eretz Yisrael, and the shuls in Bavel and Chutz La'aretz will lose their kedusha. Said certainly the holiness of printed Tanachs are going to lose their holiness, because all that was just al tanai. It was just conditional. You're supposed to have this. What's this? This is a sefer? He says, this is a sefer. He says, V'yachzor Yisrael l'yoshna likros v'lilma davka aksuva b'klaf u'chichosa b'chaser yakumu b'schiyas ha'mesa Moshe Rabbeinu shekos of Iyov v'David Melech Shlomo HaMelech alav v'solom sekos v'tilim mislev Ezra v'antzei knesses ha'gdelish setorchu v'kos v'ksuvim b'klaf u'chichosa b'kri ksiv v'suchas stumas al tikavana yadu alayim v'leila atzma kosvu rak laniach l'deiris. He says, what's going to happen? At the time of the Geula, the prohibition against reading on anything except a kosher sefer is going to return. And the people that wrote these books are going to arise from the dead. They wrote them for a reason, not just for themselves, and all the different facets of writing it, the Kriyuk Siv, and the Parsha breaks, and all the way they're written. They wrote not just for themselves, but l'deiros, for all generations. They're not going to want the printed books. They're going to show this. They're going to say, this is not what I wrote. This is what I wrote. Can you show me a copy of my book? Do you still read my book? Does anyone still read my book? And they'll give them this. And they'll say, that's not my book. Throw it to the ground. They'll have no kedusha, right? They don't want this. And you won't be able to find even a single one written properly. How are we not going to be embarrassed? So he wrote them. A bit dramatic. In any event, here we have one, and we can certainly use it during the reading during these weeks, as I do each year. We don't really need the next source, which is talking about how you roll Bava Basra, talking about how you roll books of Nevi'im and Ksuvim, and Sefer Torah and Nevi'im Ksuvim, just shows there are halachos about this in the Gemara, implying that there's supposed to be books like this. Now, the shir wasn't going to be about piyut, right? But when you're hearing a shir from me, there's going to be some piyut in it, most likely. What's this? There's a piyut by Rav Sadia Gaon for Slichos, leading to the psukim Hatei. It's from Daniel's prayer in chapter 9. So Rav Sadia Gaon has a piyut leading into that pasuk. That is, you say the piyut right before the point in Slichos where you say that pasuk. And in the piyut, he tells the whole story of Daniel. I'm not going to attempt at all a 9th century Egyptian or Tiberian or Babylonian pronunciation. I suppose I could do Tiberian. Yes. Oz b'hachlot nedudah, bath bovel hashadudah, gozarta vatokem lisherith, davar lo lahafer barith. It's a shiniyah, one of these slichos that has where there are these short couplets. Each line divides into 2, and that's the rhyme. And then the next line there's new rhyme. Or if you want to think of it differently, these are 2 lines which I printed as one, and then they're short stanzas of 2 lines. When the one going into wandering was exiled. No, when Bat Bavel Hashduda, when the Bat Bavel who would end up plundered, when the Babylonian kingdom would end up plundered, exiled B'hachlot Nedudah, the Jewish people who are wandering. You decreed and you set up, you kept, you you kept the remnant of the promise of lo lahafer rit, right? Even when they're in exile, I'm not going to be mefer bris. I'm not going to I'm not going to violate I'm not going to annul the covenant. So what did you? You gave wisdom, chachma, and uvonanta, you gave bina, understanding, and mada, you give wisdom and bina to their mada, to their minds, to their understanding, to these 4 children, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. This is from chapter 1. Zikakta ish hamudot. You linked to allowed the ish hamudot, the deeply beloved man. That's an epithet for Daniel found later in the book. Halamot lahavin v'chidot, to understand dreams and riddles. So that was basically a summary of chapter 1. He goes on the verses you have here. והילדים האלה 4 נתן להם האלוהים מדוע והשכל בכל ספר וחכמה, ודניאל הבין בכל חזון וחלומות. That to these 4 children, God gave them understanding, and to Daniel specifically, visions and dreams. And then that gets us to chapter 2. What is chapter 2? Is Daniel interprets the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Then, Tlaim asher lo char'u label yekod hisik lamo mahabel kivshanu rishafim kibam lehava lo tiv arbam. Quick summary of chapter 3. The children who did not kneel to Baal, to the idol, the Mahabel, the destroyer, the one who made problems. So the king, Nebuchadnezzar, Yakod Hisik, he fired up a fire for them. Kivshan Rushafim Kibam, but he, God, extinguished the furnace and the flames, and the flame did not burn against them. That's a good summary of chapter 3. He doesn't deal with chapters 4 or 5, but then with chapter 6, from Daniel, who exuded the aroma of fragrance. The teeth of lions was broken. In other words, they didn't, the lions didn't touch him because he was so wonderful. You closed the mouth of the carnivore, the terror. You made the lions ilafta, you made them exhausted, you made them faint, not vicious, even without prey. That's chapter 6. He doesn't deal with chapter 7 or 8, but chapter 9, Panecha bikesh b'chofer tzom v'sakva efer. Daniel, he sought your presence. He prayed to you. The chofer with I think it's two. It's not with a ransom. He's not trying to ransom. He's not trying to pay a ransom, but it's asking for kapara, asking for forgiveness, for atonement, with asking som v'sakva, with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. Why? Because he saw that the 70 years had finished. The 70 years, as he calculated them, had finished, and still the Jews had not been redeemed from Babylonia. So he said he needs to appease you. He needs to get you to atone for the people's sins. And finally, the poet Rav Sadia Gaon puts in his own prayer mixed with Daniel's that in our lowliness, you should remember Chukot, while it seems to be an allusion to pasuk in Yirmiyah about Shvuot Chukot Katsir, because it's talking about weeks, and Daniel talked about weeks of years. Here it may simply mean the Torah. Remember the Torah. Remember your covenant. Trahayim ki ein tzedakah. Have mercy, because there's no we have no deeds that can justify it. And then this goes straight into the pasuk Hashem Shema Hashem Salach Hashem Akshiva Ba'aseh Al Ta'achar, no Ki Ein Tzedakah goes to the pasuk. Just a moment, we get to chapter 9. So and beginning here. Remember what's verse? The short book, it should take it pretty quickly to roll there. We're still in Aramaic. Part will get there soon. Here there's Hebrew, and there's chapter 9. It's the pasuk. Adonai Hatzedakah v'lanu boshet hapanim gayom hazeh li'ishudol yoshvei Yerushalayim v'lachol Yisrael hakrovim arva harachokim b'chol haratzot asher hidachtam sham v'ma'alam asher ma'aluvach. Right, that you have the tzedakah. We don't have tzedakah. We don't have righteousness. We have boshet hapanim. We're shamefaced, while you have the righteousness. Rahim ki ein. In any event, what's the deal? Why would one want to do such a practice? Sure, the connection to the weeks of Nehama is a beautiful connection, and surely that's why we would read it during those weeks, if there's a reason at all. We saw that in Shmuel de Valerio. And in fact, modern scholars also have pointed out a lot of connections between Daniel and Yeshayahu. There's an article by Jenny Grillo from JBL, the Journal of Biblical Literature in 2017, from a far country, Daniel and Isaiah's Babylon. She's not really interested in the connections between Daniel and the part of Yeshayahu that we lay in Haftarahs these weeks, Nachamu through the end. She's much more interested in the last verses right before Nachamu, where Yeshayahu says to King Chizkiyahu that don't worry, there's going to be peace in your time, but long from now, hundreds of years from now, your hundreds, 130 years, 100, something like that, your descendants will they'll be enslaved in the court, or they'll be courtiers. It says eunuchs, some of them in the court of the king of Babylonia. She draws a connection between that, but in her introduction, she cites a lot of scholars who draw connections between the second half of Yeshayahu, the part that we read during these weeks, and Daniel. Certainly, there are verbal and thematic connections, so that's interesting. But also, the fact is, in the summer, Shabbos is long. This is one fact. Another fact: our reading tradition has gotten to us from antiquity, has it, such that if you go to shul and follow the reading tradition, you'll know the whole Torah. You'll know selections from the Nevi'im, from the Haftarahs. Sufim you don't really know. If you read each year Mishlei, Eov, and Daniel during these times, you get to know them. Remember, once you have the laning, that gives you a topic. You can have a lecture about that. You can have shirim about them during the week. Today we can put them on YouTube, like this very lecture. I'm not dealing with the content, but maybe I will. A lot you can do with this. I leave you with that. Happy reading, Danielle.